Hi, this is Tessa Keogh with the Legacy Virtual Users Group community. And during our February Legacy Virtual Users Group Hangout, we discussed sources and citations. A few viewers asked about census entries in Legacy. Now the question came up because we had discussed that there were lumpers and splitters, and in fact Linda and Carol are both splitters and I'm a lumper. And some people wanted to know how I enter my sources because I do it a bit differently. And I offered to use this week's Tuesday's tip to show you how a lumper, and that would be me, works with a census. Now, whenever you're discussing sources and citations, I think the first place to start is with Elizabeth Shown Mills' Evidence Explained, and that's both the book and her website. And I would really encourage you to take a look at Evidence Explained for two reasons. It's a great resource and it gives you so many examples of source citations as well as the theory behind how you're going to enter your sources, that it's just, in my opinion, the Bible for this. The second reason is because Legacy uses Evidence Explained, and you can simply put the page number of Evidence Explained in if you want to try and find the corresponding source citation in Legacy. And so they basically work hand in glove, which is really nice. The next thing I'd encourage you to do is take a listen or a watch to two of the videos that we did for the Legacy Virtual Users Group community. The first one was in May 2013 on sources, and the second one was in June 2013, and it was even more about sources. I'd also encourage you to watch Jeff live, and that's Jeff Rasmussen, and he works with Legacy. And one of the things that he did was walk everyone through how he does a census entry. And this is at the Legacy webinar series, and it's also on the Legacy website. And so I would definitely check that out. And finally, I would encourage you, if you're just wanting to learn more about citations and how people cite their sources, take a look at Wikipedia, and then you can also Google it. Keep in mind that you can always step back from genealogy and find out what everyone in the various fields does, whether that's law, humanities, the social sciences, or the applied sciences. Now, as I mentioned in the May video that I did, I think you need to make a couple decisions, and then you just need to proceed confidently in how you cite your sources. You need to decide if you're a lumper or a splitter. You need to decide if you think location or classification first. You need to make a decision whether you want to use basic source or SourceWriter or some combination of the two. You should also make a decision on whether you want to use Evidence Explained or another format. And there's really no right or wrong answer with any of these items. You just need to make a decision. You also need to decide whether you're going to fill in the text and comments section, or you're going to use the notes section, or some combination of the two. It really would pay for you to learn how to use the source clipboard for many areas in Legacy, and really take the time to figure it out, because you'll save time in the long run. So learn how to save and load the source clipboard, because it'll make your entry easier over time. And if you're using version 8.0, you might want to take a look at the shared events section. And finally, I think it's really important to have a cheat sheet or some kind of formatting sheet so you know the decisions you've made and you can continue on using them. You basically know the steps that you've worked through and you make sure you use them each time. It just makes things more consistent. Legacy census entry for lumpers. First of all, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, a lumper is someone who's going to have fewer master sources, perhaps only one, and maybe it's for a census based on a year. But lumpers are going to have many more source details, since this is where all the information goes. So for instance, I have one master source for the 1900 US Federal Census, and because I've used Ancestry for all of those, I'll put Ancestry in parentheses. If I had a couple different subscription services that I used, for instance Family Search or Find My Past, I might have 3 1900 US Federal Census entries because I'd have one for each of those subscription services. But I would just have one entry for the census. I would not be using any locations in my master source. So all my 1900 census entries are going to be found in that master source. Now, I'll admit that when I first started working with my genealogy and went to the Legacy Forum, I was confronted with a rather heated discussion on that forum about lumpers and splitters, and people have really strong opinions about it, and I didn't really know what they were talking about. And so once I looked into it in a little bit more detail and I got away from the drama of it, I just found that it was a decision about how you think, and you just need to determine for yourself what makes the most sense for you. Now, to help us with this project, we're going to focus on the Murphy family in my legacy database, particularly Lawrence Edward Murphy. And I used Ancestry.com to search for Lawrence Murphy, and my search brought back a few possible items, including the 1900 US Federal Census for Lawrence Murphy. And as you can see, I've saved the record to my shoebox in Ancestry. And I wanted to just point out a few things here. We have the 1900 US Federal Census, and we have a large amount of information that has been transcribed or abstracted rather by the Ancestry indexers. And so the person's name, age, birth date, birthplace, a number of those kinds of things show up in this front search results sheet. You'll also notice that you can save the record, that there's a source citation as well as source information, and all of this follows in that center section. You can click on the View Original Record so that you can see the image, and then I'd also encourage you to take a look to the right-hand side where there are suggested records. And what you'll see is that there's another entry for a Lawrence E. Murphy in the 1900 census, and there's a number of other documents. You'll also notice that there's a number of different spellings of the name Lawrence, L-O-R-A-N-C-E, L-A-U-R-E-N-C-E, and I'll tell you right from the start that all of those items relate to my Lawrence Murphy. So it's a really helpful feature, and be sure you take a look at that. Now, in my legacy database, you can see, as I mentioned before, that I'm a lumper, and I use classification or types of sources. Now, the master source list is the way you can go in and take a look and assign a master source. And so I list everything by document types. So, for instance, you'll see at the top of this list cemeteries, you'll see census, I might have books, vital statistics, what have you. I don't think location, I tend to think classification. That's just how I do it. And keep in mind that any of the items listed here in the master source list, your source list name, is just the name that you select. It does not show up in your footnote or endnote citation. It's just a way to find what you're looking for. And so you need to determine what's going to work best for you. What I have is the class, which is census, and then it's broken down by country, then state if it's a state census, and then year. As I've said many times, for many different things in legacy, there is no right or wrong way. There might be a more efficient way or a better way or an easier way, but you need to make a decision of what works best for you and then be consistent. And another thing I always say is, it's your database. Make legacy work for you. Don't work for legacy. You own your system. So give some thought as to how you visualize or group things, or how you would go to find them in the future, and then that's how you should set up your system. And don't forget, as I mentioned before, to check out other entries that might even be for that same census year. In this instance, the 1900 US Federal Census shows up again for Lawrence Murphy, and when I took a look at it, although I'd already found him in Skagit County with his family. That was his residence census. What shows up in this 1900 federal census is the same Lawrence Murphy, but it's his business. And I wouldn't have looked because I would have already thought, oh, I've found Lawrence, and not look again. So do be sure to check out those other suggested records. You might find that your person shows up in 2 places in the same census year. Now this is the detail for the source citation as put together by Ancestry.com, and I would say always check that source citation and the source information, and be sure to take a look at the link that says Learn More, because that gives you more information about that particular data set. And what I've done is I have copied and pasted that type of information into my master source description so that I know what that master source entails. And it's just an easier way so that I always know what's in the 1900 census in this instance. Now, my Lawrence Murphy moved his family to Canada after his wife died, and those familiar with the Northwest will know that Whatcom County and Skagit County, both in the state of Washington, and Vancouver, which is in British Columbia, Canada, are all within hours of each other. Basically, he went over the border. So this is something that you're going to want to think about, because otherwise I wouldn't have known to look in Canada for the census. But interestingly enough, Ancestry gave me that suggested record to take a look at. Now you can see that this is my master source for the 1911 census, and when you look at the bottom of the page you'll see that the suggested footnote and note is there, as well as subsequent citation and bibliography. And you can always take a look at these and then go through and edit if there's anything that you want to add to it. So when you've entered your information in the master source, always go back and check and see how it reads, and if you're going to be able, with the master source information and the detail, to find that record in the future. Now, I just wanted to show you why maps are so important. I went ahead and put in Skagit County and Whatcom County, both in the state of Washington, as well as Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada. And I just plotted them, as you can see, in a Google map so that you could take a look and see where these 3 places were where he shows up on censuses. And as you can see, they're all within hours of each other in the Pacific Northwest. And the other interesting thing that you'll see, if you take a look at the various maps that Google gives you to look at, is that each of these areas is in a heavily forested area. And this is important to my story because Lawrence was involved in logging companies in each of these areas. So always try to visualize where your people went when you're doing your census work, and this is something that can kind of help you. Another thing that can help you, I really like Ancestry, and I love their system of the Ancestry shoebox, that you can save those records and come back to them, and I think that's great. But the problem that I have is there's no filing system in that shoebox, and that is something I would dearly love for them to include. It's something that's included with a Swedish record set that I absolutely love because I can group families together and then look at all those documents together. Since Ancestry doesn't have that, one of the things that I do is I copy the pages and put them in my Evernote account. And so I'm able to use those pages, and the links are live, so I can easily get back to those documents by clicking on a live link. And if I do a search, I can bring up those names and it will bring up every document that I have for that particular person, which I find very helpful. Now, back to the Legacy database program. When I bring up the census for 1900, I can easily see that there are 128 individuals who use that master source. And that's another reason why I like being a lumper. I can find all of my individuals for that particular data set, and that works for me. When I'm in that master source list, I can highlight Lawrence Edward Murphy, and I can choose to click on the Edit Individual box, and it will bring up his individual information. I can also go down to the 1900 census and edit that if I want to. So if I edit the event, which is the census in 1900 for Lawrence Murphy, this is what shows up. And you can see that in the notes section, I include all of the information about that census entry that I want to have in there, which is the lines, the dwelling, the family number, if there's an address, and whether it's a house or a farm. Then I include each of the individuals that are enumerated and I number them. I include the information and that's going to show up in that notes section. And as you can also see by looking at the bottom of the page, you can see that I have customized the sentence. Instead of he or she appeared on the census, I use their first name. You could use their full name or anything else that you want. Legacy is really good about allowing you to customize sentences, and I would take advantage of it if you want them to read in a particular way. Is the census entry that I took that information from, and this is from Ancestry.com, and you'll note that the family shows up. They are the last family on that particular page. And one thing I wanted to point out is if you haven't done it yet, definitely play around in your Ancestry or Family Search or Find My Past, whichever service you use. Right here I'm using Ancestry, and you can see that there are a number of tools, including View Index and View Source. There's also a number of image controls, and I would really encourage you to use the mouse wheel to zoom in or out so that you can control the size of the page. And what I've done here is I have just clipped the section that is the Murphy family so that I can work with that if I want to abstract the information. But you can also open up on the tool the index, and you'll see that the Murphy family shows up here, and highlighted in yellow is Lawrence Murphy. And so if I was unable to read the relationship or the age or maybe the marriage year, I can see the information as it's been indexed by Ancestry. Always check this, because Ancestry might have it wrong. You might be able to read the information better, but it's a good way of seeing something if it's unclear to you. And another item that I had pointed out in Tools was the source. You can click on the source and grab or select all of that text and copy that into your legacy database if you want to have that source information down in your notes section, or compare it to your source citation that you're working with. Now this is the edit event for Lawrence Murphy with the 1911 Canada Census, and you can see that I've included the same format, which is the lines, the dwelling, the family, as well as the street address. In this instance, it's the Canada Census, so it has different questions that are enumerated, and for instance, you can see they're interested in your origin, which in this case is Irish, and your religion, which is not a question that's asked on the US Census. So if you're working with a foreign census, I would say to always take down all of the information so that you don't have to go back to the original document to take a look at it. Now when we go to the assigned sources for Lawrence Murphy, you can also see that my source list name shows up, and I have highlighted the 1900 federal census. But notice that the output shows the footnote or endnote, and that does not list that source list name. That's there for your use, but what's listed is the master source data as well as the detail. And if you went in to edit the source detail, you'll see that in the 1900 census, instead of just jurisdiction city, which is what a splitter would use, I include the city, the county, and the state. And what it ends up doing is providing that same footnote that you'd get, but it's just done in a different method. I would also encourage you to make sure that you scroll through all of the items, because it ends here with dwelling number, but if you were to use that scroll section over to the right, you'd see that family and household and the rest of those show up. And in fact, if you look over to the right hand side where the output preview is, you'll see that I've included the family number, the fact that it's the Lawrence Edward Murphy household, digital images, etc. So you can see what your footnote is going to look like and play around with it. And this will show you that by using the copy and paste method, and that is simply using the source clipboard where you copy and then paste it, I have included the information for his children who resided with him, and in this instance it's Kathleen Teresa Murphy. And so it will take all of that information as well as your source and put it into the other individual's data. And this is how you would do it in version 7.5. In version 8, you can either use the source clipboard again, or you can use the shared event. Now these are the assigned sources for the Canada 1911 census, and you can see that this follows the same format as I did before. And finally, I wanted to show you that you've entered all of that data in, and the thing that you should do is take a look and see what your data looks like. Is it useful to you? And so I would work with a few census entries and work with some other data entry, and then take a look at your chronology view. And I've just asked for a report from the chronology view, and this lists the person's name. It also lists a timeline to the side, which includes his age. It is the date, the event, and the event information. And so for instance here we have the 1900 census, and it lists all of that information that's in the data entry. And then if we come to the page that lists all the source citations, you'll see item 7 is the 1900 US Census, and item 8 is the 1911 Canada Census. And so you're able to see what the output is, and then you can kind of play around and see what your preference is for inputting the data. And finally, I just wanted to point out that there's always a little bonus whenever you work on something. In this instance, I was working on Tuesday's tip, and I found that Ancestry.com has been busy and has added consular registration certificates. So this is for my individual. And I would always encourage you that it's a good idea to check back for new information on any of your subscription sites, and especially if they're your direct ancestors. And this is another good idea why you should have some form of a tree online with Ancestry, whether it's private or public. So hopefully this has been helpful to you, and you've seen how I've entered 2 censuses, a US federal census and a Canadian census, for a particular individual when you're doing that as a lumper rather than a splitter. If you have any questions or comments, any other suggested ways of doing it, why not share those with us at the community? And otherwise, we'll see you again next week for another Tuesday's tip, and we'll see you at the March Legacy Virtual Users Group Hangout. Thanks so much for watching.